welcome in the former Super Bowl winning head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, Brian Billick. Brian, the whole Sean Payton thing, it's getting a lot of pub. He wrapped up the interview with Houston. I asked these guys a second ago. I ask you. Let's just take the Chargers off the board for a minute. We'll get to that in a second. But if you were being courted, as he is, we know for sure, by Denver, Carolina, Houston, possibly Arizona, which of those jobs would you find most appealing?
Well, you can look at a lot of criteria, cap room, draft choices going forward. But I think most coaches at the end of the day go, who's got the best quarterback? And I don't want to have to go get one because, as we've talked about many times, that's a 50-50 proposition. Even if it's a team that has the draft choice and you like the current draft class of quarterbacks. So in that regard, I still think you start with Russell Wilson because I still think he can be a dominant quarterback. And then what do you think of Kyle Murray? That's what Sean has to look at because he knows. I mean, he left New Orleans at a very good time. You know, when Drew Brees goes, I think I'll go too. Okay, because you don't want to lose your guru card with regards to quarterbacks if you don't perform when you lose your guy. So to go to a Houston or a Carolina that has big questions about the quarterback position, I would think those other two jobs, if indeed he sizes it up the same way with Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray, as being the best viable quarterbacks.
You think Staley survives there in L.A.?
You know, I'm a coach, and I'm always advocating for, don't panic, don't fire your coach. That was dramatic. Has there been the improvement? He's got a top flight quarterback. That's part of the bugaboo. I mean, if you haven't had a guy, then you can look at it and say, just via the conversation we just had, okay, until we get that right, it's hard to hold the head coach accountable. But he has a guy, and he has a top guy. And so I can see where the interest in a division that is very, very competitive and very, very good. So, or at least should be good. We thought it was one of the best divisions going in. Turned out not to be that way. But you're talking about Patrick Mahomes. You're talking about Russell Wilson. We'll see what happens in Las Vegas. But I would understand if they did make the move because that's just the business of the National Football League. But as a coach, it's like, boy, because they made the playoffs and they overcame some things. I'd like to see it maybe go a little bit longer.
We've talked about Lamar Jackson almost to the point of getting nauseous, but it is a huge story. And, I had Tim McGee, former Bengals great receiver, yesterday. He does a lot of radio work here in town. His thoughts about Lamar Jackson not even getting on the plane and coming to Cincinnati, if for no other reason to show some kind of leadership or at least root for his team, et cetera, et cetera. Did you think that was a bad mistake by Jackson? And if you do, what kind of repercussions, if any, does that have for his future in Baltimore?
Yeah, and I've got to put a qualifier in here because people naturally assume that I know what's going on in Baltimore because of my relationship. Okay, so the observations I'm making are strictly from the outside looking in, like everybody else. This has blown up into. I didn't think it would get to this point. I thought it was the total support for Lamar. That worked their way through it. It was going to be uncomfortable until they got to the end of the year. Now you have to decide, do you franchise him or do you give him the big contract? The fact that he's gotten hurt and the way he's handled it, which, again, from a business standpoint, I can imagine his people are advising him, no, you don't want to go back on the field unless you're 100%, particularly with your style of game. That won't bode well for the negotiations. I actually think this has soured a little bit. I think there's some damage control to be done here. And there are those that are saying he may be franchise tagged and traded. 2 weeks ago, I would have said, no, that's ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about. Now, I'm not so sure. Now Baltimore's got and believe me, I've lived it. They've been there. They know what it's like to not have the quarterback. So to have to go get one when you think you've got a good one, but at what price are you paying it? And to answer the question directly, no, I don't think Lamar Jackson has handled this well.
Some say that John Harbaugh, Brian, and I don't want to put you in a tough spot here. So if it is, then please, by all means, just say so, and we'll move on. I read a lengthy article today in The Athletic where there were former coaches, NFL executives, unnamed, of course, on the condition of anonymity, that felt like Harbaugh could have handled the whole situation a little bit differently in terms of what he answered, maybe more importantly, what he would not answer, and sort of just left out there for the public. That can't be an easy situation for the coach.
No, now, particular whether it's what Lamar is tweeting and people what they interpret and read between the lines, what a coach says, it's hard to walk that middle line to say, look, this is not something I should be really commenting on, but I have to. I want to show support for the player, but by the same token, I've got to speak for the organization. That is a fine line. So to read between the lines and say the tone or the verbiage, or I've been caught in that situation a million times, and you look up "put foot in mouth" in the dictionary, and there's a picture of me. It doesn't. I think we're parsing words here, and I'm not sure there's an absolute right way to answer whatever it is he was asked when it comes to Lamar and the volatility of the situation.
All right, you got the playoffs now this weekend. The opening round came to an end last night. Just based on watching the games, and I know that's what you do. You also watch a lot of film work. Does Tom Brady come back and play next year? Do you think he should come back and play next year? Do you think he has something left in the tank?
Yeah, I do. I've long ago said I'm not going to be the one to say Tom Brady's done, because you go down a slippery slope with that. I don't see anything in the mechanics or what he's doing to indicate that he can't play anymore. But with what team does he want to go through an off season? Does he want to change team? That really becomes the question. Can he physically still play? Astoundingly, yes, I think he can. Now, obviously, you got to be surrounded by a good team. And Tom Brady or otherwise, you don't want to be throwing the ball 66 times.
Yeah,
that does not bode well. So particularly if you're 72 years old like Brady is. So that's just not a good situation. So, but I think he is like a lot of players. When players do reach out to me and say, "Well, coach, should I keep playing or not?" And I have that occasionally. Players will say, and I've varied on the opinion sometimes. Some of it's, hey, get out before it starts to go down. Others is, hey, make them force you out if you're loving it. If you're still loving it, keep playing. But ultimately, it comes down to the question: do I really want to go through what I know what I have to do in the off season, training camp? We've already seen a training camp, all but unique situations where you're really going to do a full training camp, and then on during the season. Do you really want to go through that grind? That's really the question for him. Well, do I think I can still play?
All right, the matchups, the one most importantly for our viewers is Cincinnati v. Buffalo. There's going to be unbelievable coverage of that game. CBS sending its number one team over there yet again. You have the game that wasn't in the Damar Hamlin cardiac arrest on the field in Cincinnati. Now they will be playing in Buffalo. Bengals are beat up on that offensive line, man. I mean, all of a sudden they went the first 15 games of the year with the same 5 starters, and now they potentially could be down to just 2. How do you see this game shaping up, Brian? Because Buffalo, Buffalo didn't look so great the other day, too. Allen got sacked 7 times. He threw 2 picks. He fumbled for a touchdown for Miami. How do you see this one?
All the things you just laid out, it's going to be a fascinating emotional dynamic of these two teams, emotionally how they come into the game, because of what they shared before, and a lot has been talked about it, and it has been a bonding experience for them, whether it's the coaches, the players, but now it's, okay, now we got to go play. Not that they're not going to play hard and have that passion for it, but it might look a little bit different. But I agree with you 100%. Cincinnati, I think it's going to be a great game, but the offensive line really concerns me. We've seen it all along. When you project Joe Burrow, they're almost unstoppable. But if you don't, it can turn ugly. And with those offensive line injuries, that's got to be against a very good Bills defense. And yeah, the Bills could have looked better against the Dolphins. I think they ran into a little bit of a kind of like the Bengals did 2 weeks ago against the Ravens. Jumped up, okay, we got this thing, we're good. And that's a dangerous place to be because all of a sudden emotionally it gets away a little bit. The momentum changes. And you got to gear yourself back up. So, but I think Buffalo's still, at home and given the offensive line concerns of Cincinnati, I think this is going to be a tough sled for the Bengals.
First-year quarterbacks, not necessarily first year in the league, but first time in the playoffs. I mean, you look at Purdy. I mean, can there be any question, Brian? And look, you and I were talking about this back in August when the 49ers made the decision to start Trey Lance at quarterback, number 1 pick. Didn't play his first year. Garoppolo did. Lance gets hurt. Garoppolo comes in, gets hurt. Here comes Purdy. They're 6-0 with Purdy, and they're averaging 35 points per game. It's astounding what this young man is doing. I know he's got a lot of help around him, and you can get into the system and all that kind of thing. But I mean, have you ever seen anything like it? The way this guy's playing right now, he's 6-0.
No, he looks good, and I don't mean just the team because they do. They got the surrounding and the good formula. They're going to run the ball, and they're going to play good defense, and he's going to protect it. This kid looks mature beyond his years. Let's remember Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl when he had to come in, and Tom Brady never looked anything like this. That first year where he had to play and they ended up going to the Super Bowl, they truly, he was a 25 throw, let's get this through. Magnificent, obviously, and was the forebearer of obviously a Hall of Fame career. And let's don't slam Purdy in the Hall of Fame just yet. But he looks mature, poised, physically executes, makes plays with his legs outside the design of the offense. This kid looks spectacular, and you can't help but be. And the Niners are in great shape. They've got great trade capital. Whether it comes to Lance, whatever Garoppolo's situation is, because clearly Purdy has proven he can be the guy. And not that they've lucked into it. They did take him all but the last pick of the draft. And they've got a gem there. And the great thing is he's not going to cost you much for the next 3 or 4 years. How great is that? I mean, if you typically have a quarterback and it's time to pay him, or eventually Lance would have to have been on that. They just bought an extra year of cap relief. So life's good for them. Life's good for Brock Purdy. He absolutely looks like the real deal. And at home against the Cowboys, I think he'll stay. There's benchmarks. There's for players that have to transition. They go from preseason to think, okay, I got it. And all of a sudden they get into the real regular season. It's like, wow, I can't believe this step up. Then you think you've got it, and then you get in the playoffs. It's wow, I can't believe this step up. Well, he's already had that. He's played that first playoff game with Seattle. So he's passed those benchmarks. So this kid is the real deal.
The other one, and I'm always interested in seeing the guys in all the years you and I were together. We've talked about this, whether it's just life in general or in this case football. Trevor Lawrence, I thought. You talk about a performance, man. I mean, he could not have been any worse, Brian, than he was in the first quarter of his first playoff game. And then there with 2 minutes left in the first half, I mean, everything around him is falling apart. He takes him straight down the field, touchdown, to at least get on the board. And then in the second half, he was fantastic. What were your thoughts of Trevor Lawrence?
Well, he has the pedigree. It was a matter of just waiting and seeing when it would kick in. We've talked about it before. The legendary Bill Walsh always felt like it was about the 25th, 26th start that you knew whether you had a guy or not. It could happen before that, but if it's not happening by then, it's probably not happening. And we saw that growth in Trevor Lawrence, that huge growth. But to come back in the playoff situation, exactly what you alluded to, with the 4 picks early, and then to come back and do what he did. But he's got the pedigree. He's the number 1 pick overall. He's been in the big stage before. He seems to have a calm about him. He seems to be a guy that isn't going to let the whole thing overwhelm him, and we certainly saw it in that game. So I think he crossed a major bridge in coming back, far more so than if he had just come out and played well and they'd have beaten the Chargers. The fact that he had to overcome the adversity, I think, was a major stepping stone for him.
Do the Jaguars – look, everybody has a chance. Do they have a fighting chance in Kansas City?
we've talked every time we talk about someone playing the Chiefs, it's the same thing. Here's what there's a book on being the Chiefs. Yeah, you can do it. You can't turn the ball over. You got to get turnovers. You got to find an extra possession with special teams or field position. You got to score touchdowns in the red zone, not field goals, and you got to limit them a possession or two in the red zone to field goals, not touchdowns. Okay. The problem is you got to do all 5. You can't just do 3 of the 5. You got to do them all, or you're not going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. So, are they capable of that? Sure, we've seen that. But Jacksonville, it's going to be tough for them on the road. Patrick Mahomes, and we all know the Andy Reid after a bye and all the numbers and them ability. This is a big hill to climb. They're capable of it, but to do all of those on the road in your first really major debut in the playoffs in that regard might be tough.
All right. Brian, we always thank you so much for your time and your insight. Have a great rest of your day. Going to be a fun weekend in the NFL.
Sounds good, man.
All right, buddy. Brian Billick, kind enough to join us.